In this video, we'll go over cards which have effects that are so well known that if a new card is released with a similar effect, people describe that effect with the more famous version of it. And today's video is brought to you by Skillshare. And at number 10, we have Mistake. Mistake is a floodgate card that prevents players from adding cards to their hand except by drawing it, which basically allows you to completely lock down search cards, which most decks use a lot of. Now, despite the fact that Mistake is not that old of a card, in fact there's an older card called Thunder King Ryo with the same effect that was also heavily used in the past, except the difference between these two is that Mistake is easier to say. Usually with a lot of these cards, if there's cards with similar effects, the one with the easier name to say will sometimes win over, just like the case with Thunder King Ryo over Mistake. So if you hear someone talk about Thunder Dragon Colossus's effect, for example, it's a good chance you'll hear them describe it as a mistake for your opponent only, instead of a Thunder King Ryo effect for your opponent only. Although there aren't too many cards with effects like this in the game, and that's why Mistake is only at number 10. Number 9. Compulsory Evacuation Device. This is a trap card which has the effect to return one monster on the field to the hand. It can be used whenever you want and has no other restrictions on targets or activation requirements, and because of that, it was a really good stable trap card that got rid of a lot of problem boss monsters that normally couldn't be destroyed, being most popular when cards like Stardust Dragon were popular boss monsters that could prevent destruction, and is still good today for getting around monsters with protection, as the most common form of protection is to prevent them from being destroyed by card effects. So if you can target a card, you can get rid of it with Compulse. And because of its very simple effect, and the fact that you can shorten its name to just Compulse and people will know what you're talking about, this card is used to describe targeted one-card bounce effects. So cards like Constellar Pleiades could be described as having a Compulse-like effect, almost literally, as Pleiades can be used during both players' turns, just like Compulse. And at number 8, we have Honest. Honest is a hand trap that increases the attack of a light-type monster when it battles, and by such a degree that Honest was on the ban list in some way, shape, or form for the longest time. If you had Honest in your hand and a light-type monster on the field, you could beat over basically anything, as it would increase the attack of that monster by the attack of your opponent's monster. And it could be used if it was both attacked, or if it itself declared an attack, so it could be used both offensively and defensively. So, because of its pretty straightforward-like effect, a hand trap that increases the attack of a monster, similar cards are described as having an Honest-like effect, like Blackwing Kalute, a card that only works on Blackwing monsters that increases the attack of the monster by 1400, under the same conditions as Honest. Or even more recently with World Legacy World Lance, a card with an Honest-like effect that only works when battling a Link monster, as it will decrease the attack of your opponent's monster by 3000. So, if the card has an effect that modifies attack or defense from your hand, it is known as an Honest-like effect. And at number 7, we have Gagaga Cowboy. Cowboy technically has two effects, but the one it's known for is its defense position effect. The card can detach one Exceeds material and apply an effect based on which battle position it's in. If it's in attack position, it will gain 1000 attack, and an opponent's monster will lose 500 attack if it tries to attack over something. If it's in defense position, you can inflict 800 points of burn damage to your opponent. And because of this defense position effect, and the fact that it's a generic rank 4 monster, Cowboy was usually used during the main phase 2 in order to deal the last bit of damage you needed in order to beat your opponent. So during the battle phase, you would do a lot of damage, but you're just shy of killing your opponent, and they'd have like 500 life points left. During the main phase 2, you would just go into Cowboy and burn them for 800 damage to win, or more commonly known as Cowboy for game. It was such a common thing that Cowboy was in basically every extra deck before Link monsters came out, just because of how useful an extra 800 points of burn damage could be, to sometimes win you the game. So, extra deck monsters with burn damage are sometimes referred to as having a Cowboy-like effect, no matter how they do the burn damage, because extra deck monsters are just more versatile than main deck ones, as you don't have to draw into them or search them out. As long as you fulfill the summoning requirements on the board, you can just use them. And rarely would you call a main deck monster with burn damage a cowboy-like effect. Rarely, because there are some decks which do that. Like Burning Abyss, for example. They have a monster which can do burn damage who isn't normally played for the burn damage, as it's just used for one of its other effects. So in that case, you could call that burn damage a cowboy-like effect. Basically, only if the main deck monster coincidentally also has burn damage would it be referred to as a cowboy-like effect. Number 6, Monster Reborn. This is a spell card that has the effect to special summon one monster from either player's graveyard. There's no restriction on the monster, nor is there a cost to activate this card, which makes it one of the best spell cards in the game and was on the ban list for the longest time. And because this was also in the first set of Yu-Gi-Oh!, nearly any effect which special summons a monster from the graveyard could be referred to as a Monster Reborn-like effect, where even bringing out a monster from the graveyard could be synonymous with reborning them. Although this is kind of only for spells and some monster effects. If a trap card brings monsters out from the graveyard, then it's known as a Call of the Haunted-like effect. Because like Monster Reborn, Call of the Haunted was in one of the earliest sets of the game, and was a trap card with the effect to special summon any monster from your graveyard in attack position, which was also a really good effect, and on the ban list in some way, shape, or form for a long time in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! So whenever a trap card was released, like Oasis of the Dragon Souls, they were never referred to as Monster Reborn-like effects, and always referred to as Call of the Haunted-like effects. So there is a distinction. Spell cards and monster effects are usually referred to with Monster Reborn, but all trap cards are usually referred to as Call of the Haunted. It's a weird distinction, I know, but that's just how it is. Like, in my opinion, I guess. I'm saying all of these things in here as if they're fact, but really, these are just personal things I've noticed about the game over playing it for, I don't know, I've been playing the game since 2002, I think. This is all basically just my own personal experience of people saying these things. It's not like any of this is codified anywhere. Your friends and your own personal circle of people might have different names for these kinds of effects, but overall, I think these are pretty general. And at number 5, we have Elemental Hero Stratos. This card has the effect to add a hero monster from your deck to your hand when it's normal or special summon. It also has an alternative effect where you can choose to destroy spell and traps on the field up to the number of hero monsters you control except Stratos. Now, Stratos isn't known for the second effect, it's definitely known for the +1 effect on its summon, as Elemental Hero Stratos was one of the first and best cards that allowed you to search a card from its archetype on its summon without a hard once per turn, and worked on both normal and special summons. And because it was so easy to search off of this card, and it had good stats on top of all of this card was limited almost as soon as it came out, and was on the ban list for the longest time, until very recently. And despite the fact that this card was on the ban list for so long, people would still refer to monsters which search on summon as Stratos-like effects. And most archetypes would have at least one Stratos-like effect in their deck, which meant people were using this name tag quite a bit, with cards like Volcanic Rocket, Grandmaster Hanzo, Joker, Gearframe, the list goes on and on. There are tons of cards with Stratos-like effects, and Stratos was one of the first, had some of the least amount of restrictions, and searched out multiple archetypes, as it worked on Elemental Heroes, Destiny Heroes, Evil Heroes, and even Vision Heroes. There aren't too many cards with Stratos-like effects that work on that many different archetypes. Number 4, Pot of Greed. Now, despite the fact that no one actually knows what this card does, this card is used to describe basically any card or effect which allows you to draw 2 cards, which is usually intentional, as a lot of the best draw 2 cards in the game are homages to Pot of Greed, like Pot of Desires and Pot of Extravagance. Now, drawing 2 cards is a really good effect, so there's not too many cards that have effects like this, and the few that do have very heavy limitations and restrictions on them, but ultimately have the effect of drawing 2 cards, which I assume is what Pot of Greed does. Number 3, Gem Knight Garnet. Garnet is a normal monster with 1900 attack and 0 defense, that is used as a combo piece for Brilliant Fusion. Brilliant Fusion is a card that allows you to use fusion materials from your deck in order to special summon a Gem Knight fusion monster from your extra deck, only they'll have 0 attack and defense. And the most common use of this was to special summon Gem Knight Seraphinite, who would then give you an extra normal summon for your turn, allow you to mill a light type monster, and give you a free monster on the field for extra deck plays or tribute fodder. There were so many good things about using Brilliant Fusion that the biggest downside was having to run Garnet in your deck, as Brilliant Fusion only used materials from your deck. It did not use them from anywhere else. And the most efficient way to run Brilliant Fusion was to run 3 copies of it and 1 copy of Garnet, and hope that you never drew your Garnet, and instead drew one of the 3 Brilliant Fusions, as Garnet was a card that you never wanted to see in your hand, as it wasn't useful in your hand, it was useful in your deck. And this is why cards that you don't want in your hand are known as Garnets, because of how common it was to play the Brilliant Fusion engine, until very recently, with like the last ban lists, did they put Brilliant Fusion to 1. So cards like Predaplant Cobra and Speedroid Take Tomborg are referred to as Garnets, because they're cards you don't want in your hand and you want them to stay in your deck. Garnets are actually kind of common, and that's why Gem Knight Garnet is such a well-known card. Probably one of the most well-known cards in the game, except for maybe the top 2 spots on this list. And at number 2, we have Reinforcements of the Army. This is a normal spell card that allows you to add 1 level 4 or lower warrior type monster from your deck to your hand. So it's just a standard search card that just searches out a warrior type monster. The thing is though, warrior type monsters are one of the most common types of monsters in the game, and there's tons of good level 4 or lower warrior monsters. And Reinforcements came out pretty early on in Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan, so this card saw tons of play, to the point where it was on and off the ban list all the time, where currently it's limited to 1 copy per deck for being too good. And because of the very simple nature of this card, and that you could shorten its name to Reinforcements or Rhoda, and people will know what you're talking about, if a spell card is added that lets you search a card from your deck, it's usually known as a Reinforcements of the Army-like effect, or shortened down to Rhoda. If you say Rhoda, most people know that you're talking about this card, and if people understand the abbreviation of a card, that means it's a pretty popular card, just like the number 1 spot on this list. And at number 1, we have Mystical Space Typhoon. This card has the effect to destroy 1 spell or trap card on the field, and is a quick play spell card with no other costs or limitations to it. It just destroys any spell or trap card, and can be used during both players' turns. And because of this, it was one of the most played cards in decks, and was on and off the ban list all the time. Today though, nobody really plays it as there's much more powerful versions of this card in the game. But even then, a destroy 1 spell or trap card like effect is still referred to as an MST-like effect. And just like Rhoda, Mystical Space Typhoon has an abbreviation, where most people know this card as MST more than they do its original name. MST is arguably the most known card in the game, because it fit in pretty much every single deck when it was still used, and was a textbook definition of a staple card. So despite the fact that it's almost never played today, it saw so much play in the lifespan of Yu-Gi-Oh! That people still know its abbreviation, and will still refer to destroy 1 spell or trap card as an MST-like effect. And today's video was sponsored by Skillshare. Now, I've used and paid for Skillshare myself in the past, so I'm more than happy to recommend them to anyone. If you've ever noticed little openings to these videos, or the red lines that signifies a number for the number 10, number 9, those are all done in After Effects. And After Effects is a really complicated video creation tool. So whenever I need to learn something new, I would just go over to Skillshare and look it up, because it's so much easier than crawling through 10 different YouTube videos in which the person making the tutorial has no idea what they're talking about, until you finally find that one that has the correct information you're looking for. It just saves a lot of time if you're trying to learn something new. So, if you'd like to give Skillshare a try, I'll have a link in the video description which will give you a 2-month free trial, which is more than enough time to say if the website is worth it for yourself.